All right, continuing on with self-concept and self-esteem part 2. Here we're going to talk about some different types of self, and also once you get to a certain age, the psychological tendencies that go along with that in order to maintain your sense of self. So let's talk about the different types of self, and there's lots of different types. We're obviously not going to talk about all of them in this class. But there's a few different types that I do want to make sure you understand. So I want you to make sure you know the difference between perceived and presenting self. Your perceived self is that most honest view of yourself that you can have. So if you kind of closed your eyes and you were going to be incredibly transparent with yourself, and you were going to say, okay, who am I? Who am I? And you didn't care who was listening, or you knew it was just for you. Maybe you're writing it in a diary, or you're talking to a therapist. That's your perceived self. Again, this is really who you think you are, not trying to be anything else different, but your true perception of who you are. And you might not share this with anyone except for yourself. That's very different than what we call the presenting self. The presenting self is the person that you put out there in the world. And we have a lot of different presenting selves. We might have, one person that we attempt to be in the classroom, and then something else with our family, and then quite another self that we present at work, and maybe a whole different one that we present when we're at a religious institution. So there's no limit to the amount of presenting selves. There's only one perceived self. Now, the perceived self can be really complex, but there's not more than one. The presenting self, again, this is how you really frame yourself or present yourself out to the world, to others. And so you think about, what do people put on Instagram or on a dating site? Those are very much your presenting self. How do you want the world to see you? How do you want others to view you? This is not just how you look, but how you are personally. So how you express your intelligence, how you express your gender, how you express your strengths, and if you express your weaknesses. There is one specific type of presenting self I want you to also be aware of, and that is called your narrative self. So again, this is just a specific type of presenting self, and the narrative, the name narrative, if you think about it, has to do with telling a story. Okay, so the narrative self really is, how do you tell your story? And the narrative self occurs when you have a blank slate. So let's say you move to a new place, or you go to a new school, or you're in a new workplace. Maybe you're going to an interview. The person that you're meeting doesn't know anything about you. Maybe it's a dating site. So all they have to go on is the narrative that you give them. And the narrative can be a resume, right? You get to pick and choose what you put into your resume. So you might put some jobs and not others. You might put some positions that you held and not others. It can also be how you describe yourself. So that first time that you meet somebody and they say, tell me a little bit about yourself, you get to pick and choose what parts of your story to put in there. And we get better at this as we get older. We frame and reframe our story for different audiences. And so this narrative self is really just the story that we tell about ourselves to other people. And you can have multiple narrative selves. And I just want you to remember that this is also a type of presenting self. So why do we engage in presenting ourselves, right? Why do we put on this self that may not reflect our true self, that may not reflect completely our perceived self? There's three main reasons. So one is that we earn what are called tangible, something you can like touch and feel, or social benefits. For example, if I act a certain way at work, let's say I act very professionally and I work really hard and I do everything, I keep my desk neat, I might earn more money, right? That's a tangible benefit. People might spend more time with me. That's a social benefit. Whereas maybe my perceived self is messy and not hardworking and lazy, right? But I want to earn those benefits, both tangible and social. So I put on this presenting self of the hard worker, the very organized, professional self. Another reason is to facilitate social interaction. And so here we're talking about presenting yourself maybe within a specific role. So if you look at the picture on the slide, this man has his eyes closed. He's dressed in a certain way that makes him look like a religious leader, a pastor of some sort. And so just by the way he dresses and the way he acts, people take him seriously as a religious leader. Maybe in real life he's super goofy and he likes to dress in jeans and tie-dyes, but for his congregation, he puts on this kind of special garb and he acts in a very serious, somber manner. And, he only talks about holy things and reflects verses of the religious book that he's reading from. And in that way, he facilitates the social interaction between himself and his parishioners, or the people that come to see him. You can see this in a different way. Let's say that you're in a classroom and you're a student at Merritt College. You probably want to dress and act in a way that makes it easy for other people to interact with you. So maybe you don't wear a three-piece suit or a tuxedo to Merritt because that would, look different than the norm, even if that's what you like to do. So you're kind of looking at other people and kind of judging, all right, how do I fit into this situation and then get some social interaction out of it? And then the third reason we engage in presenting self is because we're always engaged in this act of constructing or confirming who we are, our identity. And as a part of constructing our identity, we set goals. Or we should set goals because that's how we're going to be the person we want to be. So let's say I want to be a great mom. That's a goal of mine. Now, how do I present myself in a way that's going to help me reach that goal? Well, maybe I am very patient with my children and I get them to school promptly on time and I engage in PTA meetings and I volunteer in the classroom and I drive students to field trips. Those are ways that I could construct my identity, and then even other people would recognize me for being a good mom. Let's say I wanted to be brave. Maybe I set that goal first. I want to be brave. I want other people to see me as brave. What are things I can do to confirm or construct my identity? Maybe I become a firefighter, or I go solo camping in the wilderness. And these are things that I do in order to tell that story, right? And back to that narrative self. And then people go, wow, you're so brave. I'm like, oh, I reached my goal. Okay. One thing that's really important about this idea of self and identity is that it really changes throughout our lives. And this is part of developmental psychology, but it's really good to know. And if you ever take a psychology course, or you have taken a psychology course, this will be a review for you. So let's look at the different stages of life and kind of where people are in terms of their identity. So in the ages from 0 to 2, right, babies and toddlers, they don't really have a sense of self. They are completely enmeshed with their caretaker's sense of self. And so whatever the caretakers, feel and think, that's how kind of the 0 to 2-year-old has to just go along. They don't really have their own sense of self. As a toddler gets, a little older, the 3s and the 4s, they start to develop their sense of self separate from their own caretaker. And they say that at 7 years old, this is where we reach what's called the age of reason. And this is where the sense of self really rapidly develops. Remember, in 0 to 2-year-olds, that is the time when the brain is changing the most. You're building these new parts of the brain and it's changing. And so you don't really remember who you are from day to day. But at 7, your brain is at a point where it's not really changing that much. And so that sense of self develops. It's also a time when a person is in school at 7 years old, has been in school usually for at least a couple of years. And so they're in a stable setting and can start to develop a sense of self compared to their peers. Now, the teenage years or adolescence, which actually goes from about age 11 or 12 up to 22 or 23, that is a very confusing and chaotic time in terms of identity or sense of self. And in fact, Erickson, who's a developmental psychologist, said this is a time when we question, who am I? So when you're a teen or an adolescent, and some of you still are, right? You are kind of going through phases and looking at different ways you can be and questioning, is this who I am? Maybe you're joining different clubs or different groups of people and saying, does this feel right? Is this a good fit? But then when you reach young adulthood, this is about the age of 22 for women, 25 for men, that is when the frontal lobe of your brain completes forming. And so at that point, your sense of self gets set no matter where you are. If it's a good place, if it's a bad place, if it's in the middle, that's where it gets set. And once your sense of self is set, you're going to see when we talk about these psychological tendencies, it's very hard to change. You still can, it's just a lot harder. So if you are still under 22, this is a great time to really kind of try to figure out where you want to be and start to live your life in a way that you want to live it into the future, because it just makes it much easier. And then for older adults, we're really like, when we're elders, we're reviewing our life story and we're kind of just reframing it so that we have the sense of self we want as we move into, death and the end of life. So let's talk about the psychological tendencies that are associated with the self. First, I just want to present a term to you that really defines itself. It's called cognitive conservatism. If you've had psychology, this will be easy, right? Cognitive means thinking, and conservatism means wanting things to stay the way they are or not change. That's being conservative. So when we put it together, cognitive conservatism means that the self-concept is resistant to change. And again, this is once you hit that young adulthood after adolescence and the brain is done growing, the sense of self becomes resistant or difficult to change. It doesn't mean you can't, it just takes more effort. So what happens is you have these other psychological tendencies. Selective attention is the tendency to focus on information that agrees with your self-concept and self-esteem. So let's say that I believe I am a really good, a really good athlete. Okay, let's say I believe I'm a really good athlete, and I go to my PE class and I don't do very well that day, and the teacher says something like, you got to work on your form. You really not very good at this. I'm probably just going to ignore that. I'm going to go home that night and be like, or think that person doesn't know what they talk about. And the next day I go back to class and I'm doing better. And the teacher says, oh, you look great today. Like I had it wrong. And that's what I hold on to. So I only pay attention to the things that already agree with my sense of self. I almost don't even hear the things that don't agree with that. Selective retention, on the other hand, is how I remember things. So let's say I don't feel very good about the way I look. And I go to the store and I try on some clothes, and there's like 3 different people when I come out of the changing room and I'm looking in the mirror, and one of them just kind of gives me a dirty look. I'm going to kind of look at that, right? I'm going to selectively attend to that dirty look because I think, oh, I look terrible. I already feel that way, right? So I'm selectively attending to that person's look thinking, oh, they get it. I don't look very good. Now the sales associate comes out and says, oh, that outfit looks beautiful on you. I might not even pay attention to that. I don't even hear it, right? That's the thing about selective attention. If you think you're not very good looking and somebody says, you look beautiful today, you can't even hear it because you don't attend to things that don't already agree with your sense of self. When I go home that evening, what am I going to remember? I'm only going to remember the things that agreed with my sense of self. So I'll only remember the dirty look from the one person I saw when I came out of the changing room. When I think of the sales associate, I'll think, oh, she was just so lying to me to try to sell me something. I won't remember that I looked good. I'll remember that sales associate lied to me and told me I looked good, even though I didn't. Finally, self-verification is the tendency to seek out people who confirm your sense of self. So if I have high self-esteem, I want to hang out with other people who feel good about themselves and lift me up. If I have low self-esteem and I hang out with people who feel good, every time they tell me that I'm intelligent or smart or good looking, I'm going to think that they're lying. And so I'm not going to want to hang out with those people. I'm going to want to hang out with people who are also not feeling good about themselves. And they say misery loves company. That's true. But also, if you want to stay positive about yourself, you want to find positive people to be with.